So this is our last day of the first module of a whole education in spiritual psychology. A lot of what we say is all that we ever say in the whole 7 years, so it's kind of complete in itself. But through time and through the exercises and through the meditations, there is a deepening into direct experience, which is always self-healing as well, meaning we don't have to be like wanting to be a spiritual psychologist to be here. It's the first and most important effect of these courses is on each individual. It's a whole universe. Each one of you is a whole universe. And the secondary effect is then just that change inside ourselves has a positive effect on our environment. And often leads out of naturalness to a wish, the compassionate wish to help others. It's kind of like when we're all walking through the darkness through a forest and you find an easy way up, then you want to tell everybody. You know, it's the most natural thing, because what is it to be free by alone? It's kind of miserable. You know. So that's a little bit why it sometimes kind of meanders between being an education for therapists and an education for inner growth. But in the end, it's the same thing. If you take out all of the social conditioning, it's the same thing. Every little detail we liberate inside ourselves and bring to peace is directly affecting the whole in a very, very positive way. We have a tendency, many tendencies, according to our conditioning, to bypass. And one of the chief bypasses we tend to make is of ourselves. Like, we're not going to save ourselves, we're going to save everybody else. And that always has a kind of whiplash effect at a certain stage. We can't really heal ourselves by healing our neighbour, but we can very much benefit our neighbour by healing ourselves. So, in a way, we come back again to the first day's introduction to spiritual psychology. And through the days, you'll notice that we do relate very deeply to the physical body and to physical health as well. That's because if you really go to depth psychology, really to the depth of spiritual psychology, you can't leave the body out. It would be a bypass in itself. You can't say that the body is we are not our body. The classic non-dual statement is like, we are not only our body. The body is a manifestation, but it's a very beautiful, pure, innocent manifestation. That doesn't say something separate about our identity. It's not good or bad. It's a manifestation of thousands of years of history, of human history, of our ancestors. Not just our human ancestors, our mother and father and grandparents, but our animal ancestors and our mineral ancestors. It's inseparable from the planet. And already right there in being born, there is a kind of magic that happens when the spiritual, living, quality-filled, miraculous aspect of ourselves begins to express through the physical. There's a magic happening which is of benefit to the whole. So a lot of us might feel that we should never have been born, or that our birth somehow upset the world, or that we're not needed here, that we're not wanted here. But just that movement of birth, of becoming physically alive, is itself a tremendous service to the planet, to the universe, to each other. Just that. It doesn't matter what we do with it afterwards. Just being here in itself is already incredibly worthwhile and beautiful. And it doesn't matter if we are the greatest fuck-up or the most wonderful enlightened Buddha, it's got the same value. And this is what the Buddhists mean by the wisdom of equanimity. All experience of any nature is feeding back information to the whole which benefits the whole. This is a wisdom which is deeply, deeply liberating over time as we begin to experience it. It means that there's no such thing as mistakes. It means there's no such thing as good and bad. It means we can't make a mess of it. Because even if we fail, and waste our whole life, this is also an experience which accumulates, if not through our individual life, but then through the next life or the life after that, into a place where it's enough wastage feeling. The feeling of wastage gets enough. And something breaks out of there which is perhaps more essential than it would have been there at the beginning if we'd been of purpose. Do you see? So this is partly why we radically move from the first day into a prioritization of all experience. So we're not a kind of Osho movement that says, okay, express your anger and feel your negative things and, all of that. It's not that. It's more than that. It's be free as whatever is happening in the moment, because whatever is happening is precious. It's not permanent or stable, but it's precious. And it's precious because it's not permanent and stable. The only way that a particular feeling or experience or emotion or state of being becomes permanent is when the mind grasps hold of it, identifies with it, and perpetually regenerates it to keep the illusion of permanence. This is how the world is. I am an angry person. I am bad, or whatever that I am, fundamentally screwed up. Whatever it is, the mind kind of sustains the appearance of permanence. So, yesterday we talked about the physical health aspect, the physical healing aspect. And we talked about the movement of the law of healing, which is about the movement of an affliction, a disturbance, from the most life-threatening to less life-threatening in a movement of healing. And within these general rules, we were also including psychology. So within the field of direct experience, all experience, whether it's physical pain or psychological pain, it's one experience. It's all painful or pleasurable, or neither. It's all kind of within this broad field of experience. But we were discussing later on about how does it move. If the psyche, if our psychology was an organ, so are we offloading? Is there something so threatening to our psychology that we will offload it onto a physical disease? So we would rather have, and this is the classic kind of insights of psychosomatic medicine, so would we rather have a chronic pain in the body than a chronic pain in the psychological heart, for example, than to face the unbearable? So it seems that part of the movement of the psyche is that the psyche is in a way also a kind of organ which is able to be threatened in a certain way which is worse than death. She's not here. Heather. Mm-hmm. So there are threats worse than physical death, which the psyche feels as being worse, like soul murder, like soul annihilation, the threat of like eternal hell, or eternal condemnation, or being trapped forever in a particular place, or being extinguished. There are certain spiritual threats which can feel so unbearable or so non-permissible, not allowed, that the psyche offloads into a chronic disease. Because I'd rather die physically than have this happen psychologically. So that's one movement that the psyche makes. There is a kind of offload happening sometimes where the mind is saying, this is not allowed. This cannot be here. This experience, children should not die before their parents. That's a classic belief. Children should never die before their parents. I don't agree. So it makes a This is unbearable, it's not allowed to happen. There's a whole load of intense feeling of like annihilation in the trying to annihilate the fact that children do sometimes die before their parents, often. And this begins then to offload onto the physical body, because the physical body needs to process this energy, and it's energy of grief, of anguish, of unbearability, of... you wouldn't believe it, but there is one of the strongest energies that we find it hard to cope with is the sense of pure absence. And it's a paradox, because how can absence have a sense? But it does. We can sense this feeling of the whole universe is absent. There's no God, there's no purpose, there's no nothing, there is nobody taking care. But these are all more than that absence, this feeling of absence, and yet we're able to feel it. The ultimate senselessness. So this is a very, very, very important junction in the depth, holistic psychology of healing. This energy of negation, which is an energy. Negation means soul murder, annihilation. It's like when it's almost more than rejection. It's not just that you know, if you were murdered today, murder is bad enough, but if you were murdered today, you still had a history. You still had a past. You were born. You had a family. Your life experiences were there. The intention to annihilate, to negate another person, to stop them existing, it also aims to erase their history. Not all that they are going to be, which would be murder, but all that they ever were. This is the end point of psychological denial, or psychological repression, suppression, denial, is this energy of negation, and it's got a kind of soul murder. And it sounds grandiose, but actually it shows up, this energy, in package size portions. Each time somebody says, it never happened. You know, you go to your father and you say, you know, you hit me when I was little. It really damaged me, it really hurt me. And he looks you in the eyes and said, it never happened. The energy of negation is there. It's what gives the power to the lie, in a way. So this energy of negation is very, very, very unpleasant. And of course it's dancing right there, like this sneaky tempter within this whole field of allowance of feelings and emotions, and allowing whatever needs to come forward, and allowing things to show up in experience to the depth, not just the surface, which is maybe anger, frustration, fear, but to allow the core aspects of our experience to show up, to live. This energy of negation, when it moves to the physical body, so the whole physical body is wired to survive, to stay alive, which is a beautiful thing, to avoid death. You see it through all of nature, through all animals, that their bodies want to live, they want to survive. The whole nerve system is based on wanting to survive. The whole sympathetic, to run like hell, to freeze, to be possum, to fight, all of these reflexes are all about keeping physically alive. And the parasympathetic nerve system is there to preserve the form as well, because after that you should rest, digest, come back to stasis. But when we receive a psychological death threat, like somebody doesn't want us to exist, and this is like the extremity of the energy of rejection, the whole nerve system starts to activate as well, as if it's an actual death threat, but there's no way to kind of fix it. You can't really run, you can't really hide, you can't really fight. The physical fear of death translates to something which is actually worse, which is the unspeakable horror of kind of what feels like the negation of existential annihilation. And if that energy is coming towards us, that somebody wants that to existentially annihilate us, the existential threat, then it can be bewildering. It's beyond the physical. The physical begins to react at a certain stage like it's a death threat, but it's more than a death threat. So it all sounds so horrific until now, and yet in our evolution there is an incredible benefit here. in these energies. Because if we can allow ourselves to be annihilated, if we cannot resist that, meaning our worst fear, which is maybe worse than death itself, meaning we can die tomorrow, but this thing should never happen. That fear that if it happens would feel like it invalidates all our life. So that it would annihilate our existence. Those kind of fears. If we can allow this and let ourselves be annihilated, then this miracle happens in which it becomes apparent that we're still here. We are not annihilatable. We are, the whole idea, the very core concept that we can be negated is an illusion. It's not actually possible. And that's quite the Christian message in Jesus allowing himself to be crucified. But it's throughout all mystical traditions the same principle. It's in the Narnia stories where Aslan surrenders to the White Witch. And then he becomes this greater, more golden, more glowing lion with superpowers. So partly why this works logically, when we can absorb the psychological threat and let ourselves be it, receive this energy, is that it not only gives us invincible proof of that we will exist for all eternity, first-hand direct experience of existential aspect of ourselves, that which is able to be conscious, that which is able to be aware, that which is able to be born, that which is able to play through time, that which is able to die, but which never dies. It also liberates the whole physical body from the fear of death. And that's a big deal. Because it brings such a relaxation in enjoying life. Every moment, unconditionally. And together with that liberation from the fear of death, it also brings a kind of liberation from all the other fears which are less than the fear of death. Social fears, because there's such a realization of freedom, because inside this existential space of who we are, that which never dies, which is beyond time and beyond space, there is incredible power. And I don't mean the kind of power which needs to abuse or to prove itself by being better or worse or superior or whatever. It is just the power of its own isness. Incredible safety. It's that space which they talk about where they say, well, actually nothing ever really happened. The consequence goes out of life, but as the kind of sense of grandiosity and consequence goes out, something much, much deeper is born. Which means that there is this space in which it's really, really possible to enjoy, to bring joy into the world, to bring peace into the world, to be of comfort to others, to help little by little loosen the knots of suffering, which are so much based on these kind of fears. So often in chronic disease, regardless of whether we die or not at the end of it, there is this moment of awakening to the existential aspect. And sometimes that's a moment of healing where there is a remission of the disease. And sometimes it doesn't even matter anymore if it's going to heal the disease, because there's a freedom born where it's possible to die in peace, because we all die. And sometimes it's just the time. So I'm trying to give a sense of the interplay of the psychology with the physical, how incredibly beautiful it is in a dance with itself. From this existential space, involuntarily, spontaneously, without invitation, of itself, from this clear, absent, awake existential space, qualities begin to emerge. And these we tend to call the core qualities or non-dual qualities. And they're not behaviors in the first instance. It's like emanation, vibrations that begin to emerge. So one of the first vibrations that begins to emerge is the vibration of peace. This sense of peacefulness, okayness, untroubledness, unbothered. But peace of itself, it's very strong, very powerful, unbothered. It's an incredible healing agent. And as it emerges, if we don't obstruct it, say, oh no, I don't have peace with this, I don't have peace with beheadings in the Middle East. As long as we don't obstruct it, it begins to flow through whatever is happening without interference, but it adds something. So this is when, in a battlefield, and all the horrors are going down, there can be bizarrely a sense of peace there at the same time. Or in the middle of a trauma, there can be this feeling of peace or stillness which shows up. And there is a psychology behind it. There's a religious thought behind it as well. It's grace, it's God, but there's also a psychology behind it, because the way in is cleared in a way. It's like what Leonard Cohen wrote, that there's a crack in everything and that's how the light gets in. So out of our brokenness, sometimes the qualities of healing can begin to touch whatever is there, and it has an immediate nurturing effect also on the physical body, also on the psychological body, and all the subtle bodies that we talked about, and on the environment. So we don't have to wait for, to be existentially annihilated, or for a big trauma, or for rejection, or chronic disease to come to this place. And yet it can feel hard, because between that and our daily life there is this states of numbness and depression, and not feeling almost happy but not quite, feeling kind of slightly unfulfilled but a little bit fulfilled, and this kind of little bit icky sense of self in the middle there. And this is why at the other end of the spectrum, out here in the world, we talked about the use of talents, of our talents, which you could say qualities as well. You see, they're core qualities, and qualities like carpentry or hairdressing or cooking, something that we have a deep feeling connection to. So this use of our talents creates an immediate bridge back to that existential space. And you'll notice that, like, for example, when an artist is painting and the artist disappears and into the act of painting, and even the painting itself disappears, and there is just this thing happening. This energy of quality starts to come forward. There is freedom, there is peace, there is care, there is love, there is unity. All the core qualities show up with the expression of a talent. So this is why it becomes so important to get a feeling connection with what our talents are. And we all have a lot of talents. And talents are available to everybody, to either as a given or something which can be cultivated through expression. Because that's how we cultivate, we bring heaven to earth. It's through expressing quality through our talents. So it becomes very, very important to get a feeling connection with these gifts that we have. So often a talent is hiding in a place where we suffer. And it's kind of logical if you think about it, because we suffer often because we get very, very angry and annoyed. And maybe that anger and annoyance isn't allowed, so it becomes depression. Or we're afraid to be angry, so there's fear on top of the anger, and there's a kind of depression, and we suffer there. But this anger often arises. There's two sides to anger. One side is that we get angry because people go over our borders and violate us. But there's another side where we get really, really, really angry. And that's when our natural passion to express into the world is frustrated. And if we see somebody else expressing it after we've sacrificed our own self-expression, we can even get really jealous. Because it's as if there's a social contract, qualities will not be expressed here. And so how can she just go and sing in public? Nobody even likes her, but actually you secretly want to sing yourself. You know? Right? So a lot of frustration and anger and upset to the nervous system comes about through the repression of the passion to express ourselves into the world. And it's so precious, so it's so beautiful. This treasure we have inside of ourselves is so precious, and only we can express it. It's got the flavor of us in it. Nobody else can actually do it for us. So when it's not allowed to be expressed, it's really infuriating. It creates like and a rage, like a ticking bomb, almost like a shaking. When, on the other hand, we begin to express it unconditionally to whether the world wants it, whether it makes us money, whether it's acceptable, just the expression, even if we want to make a speech and we make a speech to an empty room, the expression itself, like express to the trees, sing for the hills, like Sound of Music, you know. This has a tremendous healing effect, and not just on ourselves, but on the whole environment again, because the world, the universe is always listening. So, on the one hand, we have the psyche, because of the mental fear of death and negation, and the belief in that. This core illusion which is talked about in Zen Buddhism, that there is existence and non-existence, this core duality, that there is being and non-being, that the universe is split between what is and what is not. It's the core illusion. So this core illusion, when it's alive and feared and horrified, and we're trying to stay on the being side and not the non-being side of it, the existence side and the non-existence side, so there is an offload into psychological suffering and physical disease, the experience of pain, which often gets a life of its own of action and reaction. At the same time, so the psyche in this instance is the organ which is defending itself by offloading onto the physical, and the physical is trying to process what's impossible for the psyche to contain. At the same time, the psyche itself doesn't really exist. It's patterns and configurations of energy kept in a kind of imagined shape by the mind. This is who I am, this is how I am, and we have to constantly top that up with reminding ourselves who we are and what we are and how we are. But it's got an energetic substance which is actually made of those same non-dual qualities. It's made of freedom, it's made of peace, it's made of innocence, it's made of beauty, it's made of care, it's made of love. But these qualities in psychological form got shocked. So innocence got frozen into a kind of guilt, energy of guilt, or care got frozen into this illusion of possession, or the idea that we can be totally abandoned. So it in itself, it's full of quality when we give it the space and the permission to exist and to defrost a little bit and to loosen up, so that these universal qualities, which are the building blocks of the physical, these fundamental qualities of well-being, can actually relieve the physical and bring an enormous sense of health and well-being to the physical, irrespective of whether the physical survives or not. So one of the first places where the psyche, the bridge of the psyche, from the source of all we are, the bridge of the psyche is really supporting our physical body, is in peace. You know, if we're at peace with having a physical body at all, then our consciousness and awareness begins to occupy the physical body. And with our consciousness and awareness, the oxygen comes there too, and the nerve system awakens, and the blood begins to flow with increasing degrees of naturalness, and we don't go into a kind of contortion with our shoulders when we see people that we're afraid of, which has an effect on the body, especially if it's often that we're afraid of people. So it's a dance which is happening, and in this, we believe that the spiritual psychology is really, really, really major, and it's not to keep us alive or to make us happy in the short term, it's to bring the whole system, the whole beautiful field of experience into naturalness. naturalness of true, what we call true nature. And true nature is the nature of consciousness, the nature of the source of who we are, the nature of life. Now we're up against a lot in teaching this, and this is why we're partly passionate about it, because the chief conditioning is that our true nature is evil. Mm-hmm. That if we really relax, if you really let yourself go beneath the solar plexus, if you open that liver stream, we're all going to be killing each other and having gangbangs and I don't know what. Mm-hmm. The animals are evil and we will be evil. Animalistic is an insult. That somehow we have to fight for the right to be human. And when people, out of their sheer agony and confusion, do terrible things, we say they're not human. We split human even. So that makes it like we have to fight for the right to be the human which we anyway already are. So we're not telling you what to believe here, but we're really inviting an investigation into true nature. What are we really if we don't interfere? Are we really that bad, evil, animalistic, murderous creature? The crazy thing is if you look at animals, they're not all killing each other. They feed. But they're not kind of cruel, not like humans. They're not doing genocides on each other. There's a natural instinct, for example, when there's a baby animal, a baby kitten, the other animals, they won't kill the kitten most of the time, not unless they've really been domesticated and deranged a little bit by humans. There's a natural care that comes through, out of true nature. And this is very different from taking care and having to be a caring person. There's a natural peace that comes through, which is very different from a peace complex, like I've got to avoid all conflict in order to be human. Mm. True peace has space for war. It doesn't disappear because a war is being fought. There's an awesome power of love that arises. It's so incredibly strong in its involuntary, choiceless manifestation. And yet it's almost invisible because it's part of what keeps us standing upright. It's part of the whole motor of the whole physical creation. So sometimes we don't see it and we think that love is that loving feeling when the heart opens and we feel warm. And most of us have a love complex, that we have to be loving. But we don't have to be loving at all. We really don't have to be loving people because we are made of love. We don't have a choice about it. We don't have to work for it or pretend it or fake it. You can totally trust it's going to show up by itself. So if you're feeling full of hatred, you let your awareness just surround the hatred. Take responsibility for this energy of hatred. Notice the suffering which is in hatred. And you begin to notice that actually even the hatred is made of love. So part of the way in the next period of time, because we've really been we've inherited quite a conditioning, a kind of software of suffering, which is constantly reinforced socially. And that means that it can be hard sometimes to feel that sense of truth, of moving in the right direction, that sense of belonging, that sense of okayness, that sense of our own true nature. And one of the magical tricks for the next 6 months is to just take this mind, this programmed mind, and to begin to let it reprogram a little bit with the ethic. It's a borrowed ethic from the heart, but still it will work, of wishing well for others. So wishing well isn't doing something, it's not superior, it's not pitying, it's just a feeling vibration of wishing well, which works like a magic, like the breathing. You can even do it with the breathing, like with the out-breath, wish well. It works like a kind of elixir, like a kind of magic in dissolving one of the main causes of our suffering, which is that we are separate, individual, isolated, that we have a separate self, we have a separate entity which can be annihilated, abandoned, forsaken, betrayed. All of this is, these are very real feelings, but ultimately they're not true. We can't be betrayed, we can't be annihilated, we can't be forsaken, we can't be abandoned, we can't die. And we were never actually really born. We entered a stream of DNA, a stream of humanity, and we'll come out of the stream of humanity. So this is a lot, what we're telling, but it gives some idea, because we very much like to be like totally open about where we're going and everything, of the kind of experience which is possible through the way that we're working here. And in the end of the day, what Bob used to say, the simplest, most accurate way to say what we're going for is complete naturalness. To find the ability to be here, being is from the heart, to be here in freedom. Just naturalness. It's that simple.